All right, this is SIG Network for November 10th, 2022. We'll start it off with triage.
Rock and roll. Let me, oops. Now that I gave you a host, I can't share. Can you
let me fix that. Okay, you should be good to go now.
You got it.
I removed I triaged this, but I realized that if I add the label, it's not showing up. So basically, some of the common problems that we have with the proxies, the IPVS drifted from the queue proxy and it's clearing the UDP entries for node ports without checking if it's stale or not. I mean, it should be a problem of using copying the same pattern in the IPVS that is used in the proxy.
You can assign this to me.
I seem to recall there was an issue a while back of we were clearing ports too aggressively. That was Dan, you said you want it?
Yeah.
It also has the listeners. The binding the port listen thing that we remove in IP tables.
Okay.
But I did remove it from IPVS, didn't I? Didn't?
No, I think not. Or I don't know. My mind is blurred, but I think that I saw the binding thing.
I would have said it got removed, so maybe you were just looking at an old version.
Oh. Maybe because I followed the link based on the thing. But anyway, it's okay. Checking that. I am sure that the logic is not the same.
All right. A reminder, and Dan, you know this, but for the recording and everybody who might be new, getting assigned an issue to triage is really confirming that it exists, not taking ownership of the issue to fix it, just to confirm that it is in fact a real issue so that we can take it off the triage queue. Next issue, topology aware routing node and zone. So this discussion comes down to the KEP that Dan has about node topology. And the question is, will it also include a prefer zone model? I know we've discussed whether we should do this. I don't want to have two independent conversations. So I think that the right course here is probably just to close the issue and move the conversation to the KEP, but I wanted to bring it up for the group. Thoughts?
It is on the agenda later down as well, so I tend to leave it for that. But I do think we need to discuss this in more detail at some point during this meeting.
Is this a new KEP? I haven't seen this one before.
Yeah, that's a new KEP.
Hello, that's mine. And hello, by the way. I'm Lawrence, and I met some of you at KubeCon, and I thought I would come along to this and just say hello when I saw it on the agenda. But yeah, it's on the agenda, so we can discuss it later if you want. It seems quite similar, but just for zone and region as well. All seems very similar.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll leave this for now. We can revisit it in 2 weeks, decide whether we want to close this issue or leave it open to track the bug report. So I'll leave it for now. Cool. Next. So we have a fun little bug, and I don't know what the answer is, but I thought it was worth bringing up here for the group. If you have a pod which specifies the same container port and the same protocol, this protocol is implied here, and different host ports, we allow that through validation, because the validation checks the full tuple and says this is okay. And I know that there's somebody out there who's doing it because I tried to say that this was invalid at some point in the past and I got shouted down. So we allow this explicitly in validation, but we do not allow it in server-side apply. The keys that are specified in server-side apply, I don't know why we can't get the merge keys right on ports ever, but server-side apply calls this a duplicate key because it only uses port and protocol. Fun. The question I asked Antoine, who's our server-side apply expert, can this be fixed? Like, it seems like one of the goals of server-side apply was to be able to fix these things at the server side instead of having to update all clients. He promised that he would think about it and come back with some more information. So I just thought it was a fun issue.
We had this with the node addresses that Tanguiship had a patch for the node. We had you and Carl were with a similar one with services, right?
We have the same problem with services on client side apply, but it's correct on server side. Now this one's wrong on server side.
So is the container ports in 2 different containers or the same one?
It's the same container. It's the same container, the same port, but a different host port.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, I know for sure. But I mean, it could be if it had been different containers, then it would have been different, right? Okay.
You cannot have ports for different containers. One network namespace.
I mean, you can define them in different containers. Right? They're defined in the YAML in 2 different places. So you could define the same container in 2 different places, right? Or the same port in 2 different containers with a different host port. I'm not sure why you would want to do this. Honestly, I don't remember what the real use case for having 2 different host ports pointing at the same target port was, but it was enough that it convinced me at the time that we should leave it. So
this is port itself. It's both UDP and TCP, or I didn't see
in the example here, I left port out, but it would, if you leave it out, it defaults to TCP. So you can see in the error message here. Right.
For TCP, it would to me TCP it would be sort of understandable. You would load balance somehow over the host ports, and the flows would go once they're set. With UDP, you would get some sort of undefined load balancing over them, right? In best case.
I mean, it's all going to the same pod anyway. This is all at the pod. This isn't at the service. This is in pod.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it's not clear to me what it's
going to the same port in the pod. Yeah. So.
I think it was something about migrating from an old version to a new version and changing a host port or something like that. Anyway, we'll leave this open. Hopefully Antoine will come back and say, no, it's fine, fix it. We'll see. Connections for new services with TCP traffic policy local. There was a UDP equivalent one, but it sounded like the answer there was simpler, right, Antonio? Do you remember?
Sorry, I got distracted.
I think I closed that issue already.
Is the BGP one? Is the one with BGP?
I didn't read the whole issue. I just saw that you were there.
Okay. There is one issue that they are opening. This is I think that there is something, but I don't know if it's a bug, it's a problem, or they do the load balancer with BGP, and when they switch the traffic, there is one TCP entity that called stale. Is this the TCP or what?
The UDP one was, you suggested that they're not following the health checks.
Right. This is very messy. I need to understand when they switch with BGP, but the problem that we have that he says is legit. So when we do the contract detection algorithm, we in a kube proxy, if it's in a node with local, doesn't check that the endpoints are in the same node. I mean, we check that we go from 0 to 1, but if you are local and you are in the same node, the endpoints can be in another place. So you go to 0 to 1 locally. But I try to fix that, and that is super complex to program. And if people use the health check to send traffic, they never should run into that problem. But this TCP, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's a complex setup.
Does somebody want to volunteer to help figure out if this is a real issue?
I can help just from the BGP perspective.
What's your GitHub? Sorry.
Oh boy, hold on. I always forget.
Are you an org member? You may not even show up if you're not.
I'm not an org member.
Okay, well, I can't assign it to you then, but If you want to help, I would super appreciate just confirming that, yep, this is in fact an issue, or no, it's a misconfiguration or something. This is the issue number, so you can jump on it. In fact, I'll paste the link to the chat.
Yeah, if you throw it in the chat.
Oh, that's not what I wanted. Hold on a second.
If somebody can reproduce it, but that's the hard part.
But is this specifically then for Metal LB, or is it generic?
It says Metal LB.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I know the current Metal LB maintainer that is Fede, and I talked with him, and then it's an old version. So that's the problem. When they report these things, I don't know if they have a super complex environment that who knows, or if it's a legit bug.
Okay. All right. Next, upscaling core DNS leads to timeout errors. I saw Cal was asking some questions on here. This was 2 weeks old. Cal, do you want to follow up and see if there's anything else we can do?
Yes.
113080.
I'm assigned, so.
Yep. Okay, now we're getting into the older part of history. Dan, we need to revisit this, right? Dan?
Scroll down. I forget what this was really.
I think this
all
is the
about.
one we merged of fix, right?
Oh. Yeah, I guess we probably still want to do something.
You're still assigned.
But you had a workaround, right? Done.
Node IP accepts multiple IPs on bare metal only. Like we need to have a discussion to figure out what we want to do. I forget where we were in terms of there were issues about external cloud providers, and then that all got changed because it turned out that like what we did. Yeah, I forget. I've lost state on this bug, but
Me
yeah,
too.
we do need to do something about it at some point. Can
Okay.
you like?
You're already assigned.
Okay.
Okay, that's it for triage. I threw the next item on the agenda, so I loaded up the KEP dashboard here. I tried to keep up with PRs as they were merging to move them all forward in the queue, but I thought it was worth taking a look at this again to see. So tell me if you know of a PR that is in the wrong state here now that we've hit code freeze. We moved internal traffic policy to GA. We moved mixed protocols to GA, and we moved tracking, terminating, and reserved IP ranges. So we moved 4 into GA. Congratulations. Good job, everybody. We moved a few into beta. Which ones moved? PTE moved to beta, I think. And DNS moved to beta.
DNS.
Yeah, DNS did. And hints did, topology hints did, right, Rob?
It's been in beta for a bit. So
okay, that's not
there
news.
were some small updates, but yeah,
okay.
No change in status.
Okay. Then in alpha, we have policy status, which we're maybe not doing. Multi-sider, which did that change? Node pod multi-sider.
That's the same as in the previous.
Okay. Admin network policy isn't phase locked. Dan, you went in alpha, right? In IP tables restore and IP tables ownership?
Yes.
Okay. And then these ones I think are not merged yet. So this one we made a little bit, one of the PRs got merged for this. Antonio backed off on this.
We need to pin the person that was doing the effort, right?
Which one? This one?
Yeah, because
yeah, I think they've mostly abandoned it. So I sort of picked it up, and in my free time, I'll try to push it.
so you're going to move that. Okay.
Yeah.
I can help with that. I can help with that then.
Okay. There's a PR I think that was open for it that was waiting for the ingress status ports deduplication or de-sharing, which is now in. So that you should be able to revive the old PR and move forward with it.
186.
LB node set we decided to push off until 27. Kaping was on the agenda, but Jay can't make it today, so we'll focus on that separately. I forget what this one was. Dan, do you remember? Dual stack API server?
Just, it's not changing. I haven't made any progress on it, although I did start doing more PRs again.
Okay.
And Tim, we can talk a little bit about Kaping if you want. The gist is I think we're opening a new cap because to address kind of like what we came out of SIG Network, but it's still in the progress. So maybe it's better to talk about it next time when there's actually something physical to talk about.
Okay. All ports we will visit again one day, maybe. Host IPs is waiting for the contributor to do some changes, and this is on the agenda for later today. So then we are back to new ideas that we haven't confirmed we want to do yet. Nothing new here, and these ones are nothing new. Okay. So I guess I kept up okay. We've done a pretty good job. We got a lot of caps here. We've done a pretty good job of draining the queue. At some point, I think we had like 11 in beta. So I'm really happy that we've moved these ones all forward. I know that one of the items on the agenda today is what are the themes for 27, right? So I will relinquish my control of the screen at this point. Back to you, Casey.
Great. And on cue, our next topic is what are the major themes for 126?
26 or 27?
Well, it says 126 on
the
sheet.
Yeah, somebody.
And it's 126 in the discussion that's linked as well.
Oh, this is for so this is for release.
Yeah, somebody pinged us on Slack, and so I just added it to the agenda.
I see. What do we say our themes are? Finishing things?
Well, terminate. I was going to do a blog post on just the GAing the terminating condition for endpoint slice and the traffic policy changes and whatnot.
That's great.
I don't think if you folks noticed that trend over the last maybe a year or so, where we're either getting super complicated bugs that fixing them is usually behavioral change, or all the features, bending features are significant level of work, all of them. Like if you looked at, there is no more, I don't think there is more small features here and there. Everything is big, everything is a major change. And usually that's why we had 11 entries in the beta queue, because you want to make sure that they are really, really well done before you say, okay, we're done with this. So it's going to be the trend moving forward as we mature. All the bugs are going to be, like you look at the bugs now, you get really big description of the bug, and it's really sharp edges, like very corner case. So
yes, all the easy stuff is done now.
For now, until we discover a major theme that we missed, like the all ports.
Yes.
The all ports to me is crippling Kubernetes networking as general, because a lot of people cannot run NVAs the right way on them. They do ugly hacks around that. But
yep.
It's important. I have it on my mind every now and then. I look at it and I was like, oh my God, if I went into this, it's a year gone of my life. Maybe we should just go into it. And
I mean, we can talk about reopening it. It needs somebody who's going to spend the time trying to come up with the creative way of getting around the corner that we've painted ourselves into.
Give me this week. I'll talk to you next week about it. All right, let me think. But it's a worthy endeavor, in my own opinion.
And we have an option, a tool that we've never really used in our toolbox is Core V2. If we need to restructure an API as a V2,
no,
we don't need to. It is policy now. It is policy now. It's smart man, but it is policy now that API groups are sparse. So you can have a V2 service without having a V2 pod. So if we were to spawn off a V2 Alpha 1, we could do it for just service if that's what we wanted to do. If that's the answer to, we can do something horrible in V1 and then do something cleaner in V2.
It's the answer for a lot of problems other than this one. Let's face
it.
Right?
Remember, it has to be round trippable. So like whatever we do still has to be representable in the old version.
Okay. Tempting.
Okay.
Very tempting.
Anyone else have any other themes they wanted to call out for 126?
I listed in the doc finishing things, endpoints, sophistication. I think that covers a lot of the work we've been doing.
Sounds like not. We can also move this to the mailing list in case there are anyone wants to fill in. So I'll send a message there to get conversation going on that. The next item is Dan Winship.
Right. So there's discussion of multi-network stuff at especially during the contributor summit at KubeCon, and it got me thinking that the way multi-network services, which, and again, this is 2 levels of not yet defined in the future from where we are now, but there was discussion about the possibility of multi-network services where you could have 2 pods that are each connected to a backend network where no node is directly connected to that backend network. And you want to be able to have pod A connect to a service IP, which redirects it to pod B. And the way that we do service IP rewriting now, and sort of everybody's like idea of this is sort of the canonical way that services happen in Kubernetes, involves the rewriting happening in the host network namespace, which wouldn't work for this case. On the other hand, if you had something like Cilium, where it rewrites the packets inside the pod namespace, it would work. And I've always thought that the way Cilium does it is kind of like a gross hack, because it rewrites the connect call rather than actually letting the packet get sent and changing the packet once it hits the network data path. But it solves this issue. So we're thinking about our data plane in the future and everything in OpenShift, and was just wondering, because if we end up adopting a view of multi-network services where the expectation is that you can do this, for instance, because the people at Google who are pushing the multi-network thing are planning to use Cilium, then that has impacts on Kubernetes networking as a whole. And so I don't know what I was hoping we would decide, but I just kind of wanted to bring up the topic.
If I can, so Dan, I think what you're saying, I'm not sure I exactly follow your use case, but I think it will boil down to which node you would attract the traffic, right? And considering your use case, considering as well a case of whether your networks are isolated or not, right? In your implementation, right? Because if they are, let's assume those are isolated stuff, and those 2 nodes that you refer to, those 2 nodes would have to have access to those to the network, to those to the specific networks between you kind of try to redirect stuff between. And in that case, it's just the same thing. It's just on a different VLAN. That's how I'm seeing this. And because this is how it's happened today. The redirection can happen because all the nodes have connection to the default network. That's how I'm kind of calling the default to today's network, right? If you apply the same concept to the other networks, it's still the same, right? It's just on a different network.
If you apply that concept to the other networks, then it is the same. But it wasn't
so then
to me.
It's okay, and basically, that's how I'm thinking about it. And as you said, we are 2 levels or even 3 levels on abstract here. And before we get to the services and how can those be done, that's way out. But that's how I would see that. And yes, you're right. We are kind of Cilium based here in Google, and kind of we have those things kind of fleshed out for us in this simpler way, right? But I hope wherever, at least just what I mentioned to you with this network isolation, how we would look at those, then it doesn't matter, right?
But what if, for instance, the backend network is encrypted and every pod needs an IPsec key to connect to it? Would this imply that the administrator would be required to also give an IPsec key to every node?
And that I think as one that still apply, because depending on are you encrypting the whole pod or just specific network, right? Because that's when this is always for all those features that you can list out, how we are applying them. And this will be always the case for every features that we have, services, network policies, how we do apply them, how do we treat them with multi-networking, right? Are we treating them on all networks? Do we need to split them per network? Those are the answers that right now we might have some hints and some suggestions, but that's something that we need to figure out, right? Like even this, right? The encryption, are you saying that it's going to be applied for the whole pod and then all the interfaces?
Well, I was just suggesting, a theoretical case where two pods could be connected by a network that the node is literally unable to send packets to because, it doesn't have enough information to be able to send packets to a network.
And that's exactly won't that fall into the case where a specific node doesn't have access to that network and it cannot participate in it? I would see it as such, right? Because I think you're looking at the case where you want to cross network boundaries, and in that case, I think we don't want to get into that story, right? Because I assume networks within the cluster, at least that's what I'm trying to kind of position it as such. Where networks are kind of isolated within the clusters, and we should not cross that boundaries. And now, what I think, if a specific network is isolated,
no, I don't want to cross the network boundary. Two pods that are both on the same network. If one of them wants to connect to a service IP that routes to the other pod, that can only work if the service IP gets routed in a place that has access to that network.
But why don't we make that a requirement? I think that's kind of what we agreed in the conversation.
Make what a requirement?
That the pods should be in the same network to belong to the same service.
We come back to the same thing the whole time. I'm talking now about sort of one L2 network that's stretched or an L3 service, an IP service where we can have different networks on different nodes that is connected by routers, and then how the service connect to that, or?
Okay, now the definition of network is something, a domain where all the pods can reach each other. Doesn't matter the L2 or L3. And the service has to have endpoints. And we say all these endpoints should be in the same network, this network, Kubernetes network, where everybody can reach. Otherwise, we can create services that people may not go to backend.
I'm good with that definition. Then you can have networks of different types in reality, implemented in different ways.
Maybe I need to draw some pictures.
Exactly. Really. When I went to KPMG, it's not KPMG, the multi-network Slack, and I've seen all the discussion. It's very fruitful discussion, but the discussion doesn't move things forward. What moves things forward is consensus, and consensus will come from somebody drawing a picture, writing some text, and then people comment on it, and then we come to an agreement that may not make everyone happy, but at least will make everybody think the same way. Because every time you talk, every time one of us talk, words means different things to me and means different things to the people listening. And we really need to unify this under certain definition of what a network is, what's the expectation of a network. Doesn't matter if it's correct. It doesn't matter if it has an agreement across the board, but at least it's a starting point where we can actually all speak the same language. Because right now, I honestly do not think that we speak the same language. The words just doesn't register the same way.
I agree. And that's why we are currently trying to just come up with those use cases and requirements. I think, Dan, we can have further discussion. We have a session next Wednesday, and please bring it up. We'll add it to agenda item to our meeting, and we can further discuss this. And Carl, I agree with you. we are trying to eventually get all those requirements into GitHub, and then this is where, with some pictures, with some description, and basically then from there we can have common language and common understanding.
And yes, I will bring this up at the multi-network meeting, I guess. The reason that I brought it up here is because, as I was saying, it potentially has implications for Kubernetes networking as a whole, in that, like, it would be impossible for a CNI plugin to implement multi-network if it does not implement services in a particular way.
So let's please be at the meeting, and I hope we are not leading this. I know I might be subjective because with Cilium, it's easier for us to do some of those things, and I see your point, but please be on the meeting, and please be kind of what can we do, and what sort of requirements should we push towards to kind of make sure that all the implementation can support them. Okay.
So we have fundamentally two different needs, right? One is to connect pods to each other over, call it secondary networks. And then we have a whole other industry like telco and so on that wants to connect things that's outside a cluster into pods. And that's partly what we need to sort out.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. We've got 3 more agenda items that I want to make sure we get to. So I think we should table this one for now. Next up on the list was Akil and Cal.
Yeah. So where is he? Is Akil here?
Yeah.
So the last time we talked about this was, we need to start a doc and share some ideas in order for us to start moving. If I remember correctly, the consensus is we need to do this. But the question was how and what kind of parts that should go outside. And the document talks about these things, right? Again, the document is not meant to be correct, but meant to reach correctness after we all read and comment and so on. So please just go read and let's agree. And once we agree, it becomes a function of finding who is going to carry the effort forward. That's a different challenge for tomorrow. But for now, I just want us to agree on this is it. This is the scope of what we want to move out and how we will move it out, and make sure that we covered all the bases, because it will suck if we start implementation and then we discover, oopsie daisies, we have a big thing that we didn't talk about or think about. More eyes minimizes that risk. Gilles, did you want to say anything? Do you want to add more?
I'm wondering, is it worth maybe summarizing generally, like, what was discovered from the doc, at least the current proposals?
Do you want to go for it?
Yeah. I think generally speaking, we've outlined 2 approaches. One is to sort of capture the entire endpoint slice controller and move it to a shared library with having the data sources be configurable. And that includes the reconciler, the plumbing, everything. Whereas the other possible approach is to just move the reconciler, keep the plumbing and sort of the other event handling logic where it is. In both cases, the reconciler is, I think, there's at least consensus on the reconciler having to be part of the library, less so on what else needs to be moved in. Is that a fair summary?
Rob, I think your opinion is probably going to be the most important in this discussion, because you wrote these things.
Yeah, no, I have said things before that I think my opinion's still similar, that this is a good idea. This is not something that this is something that a lot of other projects seem to have interest in, and I would rather make that slightly more maintainable than just expecting people to just copy and paste code and then magically try and keep it up to date or depend on K/K directly. None of the alternatives seem great. I don't have as strong opinion on the specifics of what we pull out, but it seems like the reconciler bit is the most obvious part because that's all the core logic and the rest is pretty straightforward.
So in order for us not to anger the gods, what is the right way to do or to go about this? A cap, and we approve it and follow the process, or how should we approach this?
I'm not sure this needs a, so when I think of a cap, and somebody else can correct me here, but I think a cap is something that is feature gated, goes through alpha, beta, GA stage. And I can't think of any good way to feature gate this.
No, I think that you just need to ask for a staging repo and SIG chair and tech lead approval and this thing. I think that's how, at least is how I see that people is doing in other SIGs.
Just to be clear, yeah, just to be clear, the CAP is not necessarily alpha, beta, et cetera. CAP is how we share information across different parts of the community where we need to share information, right? So even large refactoring can justify a CAP. In fact, I'm going to be writing a CAP just about moving code around in a cleaner ways because I want to get feedback on it. So I'm not saying we need a CAP for this. I'm just saying it's not necessarily about alpha, beta, GA.
So I would recommend a CAP because if you're moving a lot of code around, you probably want to do something to get consensus before you moved it. And like the PR is humongous and people have comments to kind of move things elsewhere and rename stuff. So the CAP can skip like productionization, right? But it helps to just have like this one thing that someone can stare at and be like, okay, this is what's happening.
I do believe a CAP is good because it will leave a trail of breadcrumbs. So for the next generation, trying to figure out why it was made in a certain way, people can go on track, like the discussions, the CAP comments, and so on.
So to clarify, we're talking about a CAP that does not have PRR. It does not have any stages. Really, it's just yes or no. It's implemented or not.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great.
One of the things we've been talking about is whether we need sort of different templates for different kinds of CAPs, different flavors. This feels like it's probably a different, like an internal only CAP where it doesn't need the same level of PRR, but for the lack of having such templates, just NA these sections that aren't needed.
The next comment, the next thing to consider is for the duration of the move, we gonna be synchronizing code across or finding a way to keep things synchronized, because I don't want to end up KPNG right now is held by a set of heroes who are trying to replicate every move, everything we do in proxy. And I hate to have another area like this in the scope of this group. So the question I have for the group now, are we in a good position to start moving these things, knowing that for the next foreseeable future, we do not expect major changes? So the work to synchronize this is going to be little? Or do we expect a lot of movement on the reconciler, the controller, and so on over the next, let's say, 3-6 months?
Sorry, maybe I missed a detail. Was the proposal that we're going to put it in a staging and then put it in a repo, or put it in a fresh new repo that is really detached?
We did not make that decision, but either way, it's the same. The synchronization effort is the same, right?
I mean,
staging is much easier because you can do things atomically, right?
And the other thing, if we don't put the staging, we are adding as, I mean, I really against putting out of stage because it goes out of sync with the code, and then we need to start playing with syncing in this thing to sync in the other, and
we're seeing this now even with like Kubernetes utils, where people want to take a library out of KK, put it in utils, but refactor it in the process. And we keep coming back saying, go refactor it in KK, show us how it'll be used, and then extract it into utils, and then re-vendor it back in.
The thing is, if you want to add something to that reconciler, you need to go through all the Kubernetes gates. Otherwise...
So what this entire discussion tells me is I think we're in a good position to start the CAP, right? And write the things and make sure that we do that. We make like there will be dragons, and we'll slay them as we meet them. Achilles, do you want to start the kip or do you want me to start the kip? One of us has to start because both of us, we spend the most time. So
yeah, I can start the draft.
Okay. That's
Cal, I'm happy to try to help here too. Like, I feel like we're gonna run into the same thing with Kaping, so I'd like to.
Oh yes.
I don't know if
yes. It's a different dance, similar party, right? So, all right, cool.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Next topic was Ismail.
Yep, yeah. This item was by me. So yeah, this was the first item also shared by Tim in the beginning of the triage. So I wanted to bring the topic in this round because I was not sure how I want to proceed or how we want to proceed. So on our side, we want to enable we want to reduce the cross-zone traffic, and we want to, if possible, keep the traffic in the same zone. We evaluated topology-aware hints, and yeah, due to its algorithm / heuristics, yeah, we cannot actually use it. We cannot make sure that. I mean, it's not a good fit at all. Maybe. Yeah, I don't have anything against topology-aware hints. Maybe it works great in some scenarios, but in my opinion, these scenarios are a very little small subset of what is out there to be supported. So yeah, in this issue, I try to put everything I know, like existing caps, existing drawbacks, existing discussions, references, and so on. Yeah, I myself tried for 1 week adding support for annotation like topology-aware hints equals always, something that I think was discussed in the SIG network channel, and such annotation would always add as a hint the zone of the endpoint slice of the endpoint itself, and in this way to achieve deterministic hints, and in this way trying to implement this preferred zone policy. But yeah, then there were the comments from Rob that maybe the hints are not good home for this, and I can agree with him. And so yeah, I'm just not sure how to proceed. So it looks like to me, I mean, long story short, it looks like the service topology feature was deprecated and dropped in favor of topology-aware hints, but actually the service topology feature was the more powerful one, allowing users to configure stuffs like this. And now when I also track the communication in the cap, this cap for a not level topology from Dan, I also see comments like mine that maybe we are now trying to go to the service topology like definitions. At least this is my understanding. Yeah, so I don't know. Probably Rob, you have an opinion on how the things should look like.
Yeah, no, that's a good introduction. I understand where you're coming from. And I'll completely agree with you that the previous approach, topology keys, was much more powerful and at least in concept. I don't think its implementation was ever very powerful, but the concept of it had lots of capabilities, right? I come at this from the perspective of somebody who sees that Kubernetes complexity keeps on increasing, and supporting Kubernetes is difficult, right? It's very easy to configure Kubernetes in a way that you may regret at a later point. And topology keys felt like that thing that could very easily break you without, it felt like just a thing that when configured in an unexpected way could have 4 failure modes. And it also wildly complicated to implement. what I think you're asking for is I may be confusing. There's been a few different issues here, and I think the primary request, it feels straightforward of just if there are any endpoints in the same zone, route to those. Otherwise, traffic policy cluster, just default routing behavior.
Exactly.
That if that is the full scope of the feature request, I think I can get behind something to do that. I have seen other comments that have kind of gone a bit further of, well, we'd also like to configure, all these other different basically bring back topology keys for lack of a better term. I think.
Oh, go on, Jimmy, I was just going to say, just comment on this, I guess, from the user point of view. Like, to be clear, first time here, I don't really know much of this. Like, I'm just kind of coming at this like, oh god, you broke my thing, and that's really annoying. We rely very heavily on the precision of placement that we get from both the scheduler and previously the networking around what zones, what node zones and regions we put things in, because we're a small presence with large multi-tenancy. So we kind of have like these use cases of one user wants to deploy a small application in a new place. And so we want to just add nodes to an existing cluster and put things there. And kind of the scheduler has allowed us to do that, and we can be controlled. And I agree with you, it's very easy to fuck this up, but like presuming you don't mess it up, like it's really powerful, and we've really enjoyed that feature. And the scheduler's kept that, but then the networking piece has been removed. And when you've removed the networking, locality, having scheduling locality is nearly useless. Like we're really struggling to actually get any value out of it because you don't get any guarantees. And kind of one of the things that Ishmael was talking about as well around the deterministic stuff means that like one day this works and the next day it doesn't, and you're trying to figure out why. And it's because like someone added a node to a region your app isn't even in, and like the entire thing breaks. And like talking about you kind of set something and you want it to, you're saying the previous problems around the serverless topology was that like you could enable it and cause problems for yourself later. The hints feel like that as well. You enable it, it kind of works, and then unrelated changes can break functionality in a way that becomes production critical. And so I also don't quite understand why this isn't either or. I'm kind of curious as to why we couldn't do both. And in documentation, in the way that we communicate these features, kind of say like this is the hints are like you don't want to think about this thing works for you, but then like if you really want control and you're at a scale where you need to do this, then here are the topology keys or whatever we call this feature. Then you can go and play with those. And talking about like, do we just want nodes versus host zones and regions? Like I want them all. I want as much control as you can give me, and I'm willing to take on the responsibility that sometimes too much control could mean I break my own thing. But like,
right. So you've touched on the major points there. There's a couple things that I want to emphasize, right? So there are a number of other systems in the world that do topology aware stuff, right? So before we made this decision, we went out and we took a look at them, and that's ranging from like Kafka to Envoy, right? And the general consensus seemed to be around region, zone, and maybe a subzone. Some do, some don't support something smaller than a zone, but nobody supports arbitrary. Don't get me wrong, I love arbitrary, but nobody supports it. And so what we found was adding arbitrary topology keys makes it practically impossible to integrate with these other things, right? Like you can't plug Kubernetes into an Envoy-based control plane because it doesn't understand random string-based topology. Could we go out and teach Envoy to do that? Maybe. That seemed like maybe it was a step too far. So we wanted to step it back and say, how do we do the right thing most of the time without people having to say anything, right? Clearly, maybe we haven't hit the most of the time part of this yet. We knew that there's a whole bunch of corner cases in the heuristics. I'm 1,000% on board with refining the heuristics and giving better hints to make the heuristic do the right thing even more almost all of the time. And I've come around to the idea of offering more explicit deterministic policy, but I don't think it needs to be as flexible as arbitrary topology keys. Or rather, if that's where we have to end up, then I want to go there kicking and screaming. And so the KEP that Dan opened is sort of my agreement that, yeah, I wanted to take this away from people because I thought almost nobody will get it right. But the truth is there are people out there who need it as a break glass until the heuristic works. We're not done, in my opinion, until the heuristic works for 3 nines of people. But we're not there yet. And if we want to open the door to the explicit control of this, I'm okay with that, but I want to do it conservatively, like not arbitrarily. So if we wanted to offer this prefer node, I'm probably okay with prefer node. If we want to offer prefer zone, it seems pretty reasonable. I would rather not offer prefer node and zone. Like I feel like prefer zone probably infers prefer node as a second order, but we can discuss that. I don't want to add 10 different knobs here. I'd rather add 1 or 2 that cover most people's cases. And then I want to hear from people who are using this about why they have to use this as opposed to letting the automatic stuff work. Rob, does that align with the way you've been thinking about it?
Yeah, it largely does. I think that the fundamental problem with hints is that it falls apart below, say, 10 endpoints. That's a fairly arbitrary number, but we just don't have a feedback loop. And we're trying to say it's reasonably safe to keep this traffic in zone because we think we have enough endpoints here. And below a certain number, it's hard to ensure that every zone actually has enough endpoints allocated. So again, from the hints perspective, it's safer to just fall back to default route traffic everywhere. I think what I'm hearing is that in some cases, that is actually worse than potentially overloading local endpoints. So, one solution there is to make the perceived overload threshold configurable. That's one, like just pile on with hints, but just make it a little bit more configurable. The other thing that I'm interested in is just building on Dan's KEP, because I feel like the clear feature request we're getting is prefer zone, and that doesn't need to involve hints at all. I don't know, but I think this should be discussed on Dan's KEP.
So we're at, sorry guys, we got 3 minutes left. Antonio, is that enough for your?
It's a discussion that my point can be postponed.
Okay.
Just keep. I think that's interesting, more interesting what we're talking now.
Thanks, Antonio. In that case, carry on, guys.
I was just going to say the other thing that has come up is that topology would be.
Yeah, no, I had my hand up and then I was muted. So I also seen the problems of using topology to describe these things, as well as using other metrics such as latency and bandwidth. There's no simple solution unless you have many endpoints, just like Rob said. I'm done.
I was going to say the other thing that has come up is that topology would be easier to solve if we had better deployment models where you could create a deployment or daemon set or whatever that said specifically this needs to be spread out across zones so that we can safely use topology.
That's right. I worry that we create a siloed solution here, that if we're not talking to the SIG apps folks who own daemon set and deployment, we're missing an opportunity to provide a complete story.
Actually, we have a feature called pod topology spreads, and we use it widely, and it does exactly this. It spreads your workloads across zones or across topology. I will not now try to find the link. And yeah, Rob, we are actually looking into we are looking into the only keep the traffic in the same zone, prefer zone, and I think a lot of people will be asking for this because the cross-zone traffic is charged a lot by the cloud providers, and yeah, I mean maybe in Google you don't have such problems, but I think a lot of people will face more things. And yeah,
we have this problem
too. It is more expensive. and more latent. So yeah, exactly.
There is also
I want to add another important thing here is that we are thinking only in terms of proxy, and we faced this problem with network policy. We need to think that right now there are more things like proxy doing services, and we need to think that this has to be adopted, or we end with features that only work in one place. Because right now I think that proxy is in all the places, right? We shouldn't have another network policy thing.
Yeah, no, Antonio, your point is exactly right, right? The topology keys was easy for us to implement in kubeproxy and very difficult for us to implement anywhere else because all the other control planes don't understand what we're doing. So that's why I want to be cautious that we don't go and invent stuff from whole cloth where we don't need to.
So should we make the selection function sort of interchangeable? So a cluster owner could shoot down another function. In reality, you have a set of endpoints, right? You're going to pick one of them. Should that be possible to specialize that one in some way and just hand over the responsibility if someone really, really wants to do it?
I'm going to drop, guys. I don't think it'll end the meeting because I gave it to Tim, but we are at time. So just in case anybody else needs to drop for another call.
Well, yeah, I need to run too. We have a KEP, we have this open issue. I'm happy to discuss in both places for a little while, but I'd like to converge them if we can. And the goal here being to provide enough of a break glass so that people who need to do this can, without burdening people who don't want to do this, because the goal should always be to do the right thing by default, right? Even if we're not there yet.
And not having an overly complex function doing it that no one understands.
Right, and that can't plug into other things, because the reality is we have to exist in the world that we find, not in the world that we want.
Okay,
we pretended that wasn't true for a long time.
Very deep.
Yeah, it's
sorry,
autumn, man. It's fall.
There's one last question on chat. Yeah. Are we doing a meeting on Thanksgiving? Is that the 24th?
I think that was canceled in the agenda.
Okay. All right. So there's the answer. No meeting on the 24th. We're at time. We'll stop the recording. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Let's bring the rest to the mailing list or the issues. And I guess I'll see you all in 4 weeks, not 2.